And when you said, I'm just curious, when you said behind the curtains, there was different things, like when you pulled off the curtains,
Yeah.
how did that look like?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that became apparent was the degree, I use the word manipulation, the degree of manipulation that was going on. And there were a number of ways that the manipulation showed up. I think the most prevalent would be what I call in my own mind the kind of bait and switch. Excuse me. Which would be, something would be dangled in front of us. We're going to do this. And once people was on board, once I was on board, once other people were on board, either we'd change it and do something different, or it would just be dropped. It would just be forgotten about.
Welcome to Coaches on the Couch, the place where experts share their journey and inspire you to take action. My name is Pratishtha Bhalla, and I'm back with another amazing coach who will be sharing today a lot about meditation. Because we have today with us Neil McKinlay. He is a meditation teacher based in British Columbia, Canada. Join with us as he debunks the myths about meditation, shares some easy tip to help you meditate, and he shares his own story, his journey on how he recovered after a long relationship with a dysfunctional spiritual mentor. There are going to be a lot of personal and powerful stories, so make sure you stay with us till the end. And subscribe to the channel now so that you don't miss any of the updates. A very warm welcome, Neil, to Coaches on the Couch.
Thank you very much, Pratishtha. Wonderful to be here.
Thank you. And let's start with a very common question that people ask. Why should I meditate?
Why should I meditate? In many ways, there's a lot of different answers to that. So I'm just going to keep it personally. Why do I meditate? I meditate because it brings a measure of settling into what for me can be a very unsettled experience of life. And because in that settling, there's a sense of guidance or direction or wisdom that becomes accessible to me. That wisdom is always there, but I connect with it. My relationship with it becomes a little bit more transparent when I meditate and when I settle and when I find some measure of rest in my life, both of which is what meditation offers me.
When you say wisdom becomes accessible, so I'm just curious, is it not always accessible to us, or does meditation improves our access to it? How does that work?
I think the answer is a bit of both. It's always there. The wisdom is innate, that there's this built-in intelligence that is part of our operating system as human beings. And so from that perspective, it's always there, it's always accessible. It is, however, clouded over by all of our various distractions and reactivities and so on and so forth. And so while the rays of that intelligence, that innate intelligence, may shine through those clouds in a happenstance way from time to time in the course of our life, and they do. I mean, you don't need to be a meditator to be in touch with this. It's there, and we see it in people in all walks of life all the time. What meditation does, though, is it develops our capacity to kind of settle through those clouds and develop a more transparent and ongoing relationship with that sun of wisdom, a more transparent, a more ongoing, a more continual relationship, a more intimate relationship with that. So it's a bit of both. It's always there, and meditation heightens or develops our capacity to be in a relationship with that.
So what I understood is that the wisdom is there, but we are not settled because of a lot of disturbances in our life, and then we settle down and then we access that wisdom. Is that
Yeah,
why?
that's a beautiful description of meditation practice. Yes. And wisdom, it simply means what I mean by wisdom is it's a sense of seeing things clearly, seeing things for what they are, and having a sense of how to move forward on that basis. And so when I use the word wisdom, sometimes it sounds like a big deal, like capital W, wisdom. But oftentimes it's a very ordinary, not big deal sort of thing. So for instance, I'm all kerfuffled, I'm all busy, I'm all caught up in my daily life. I sit down to meditate. There's this sense of settling in. And as I settle in, I connect with a sense of, wow, I'm really tired and I'm really kerfuffled. And I just need to take a little bit of time to slow down here. That's what I'm talking about with wisdom. It can be very ordinary. I mean, yes, sometimes it's insight into the nature of reality, big wisdom, capital W. But more often than not, it's a simple insight into what's going on for us, a clear seeing of what's going on for us. I'm really tired and I'm really kerfuffled, and I could use just a few minutes of quietude to settle before I try and move on to the next task.
Yeah, Neil, but often people say we cannot sit at the same place to meditate. So, how do you help them?
Can you repeat that question? There was a little blip.
Oh, I'm sorry. A lot of people they say that we cannot sit and meditate because sitting at one place for long duration is not possible, maybe because of a routine, because of just because we just can't sit at one
Yeah.
place for so long.
Yeah,
So,
thank you. So the way I teach meditation, when I teach meditation, there inevitably comes a time when people say, how much should I meditate? And I used to offer an answer to that question. I used to prescribe an answer to that question, and I don't anymore, because what I've learned over 15 years of teaching is however much we meditate is however much we meditate. And if someone meditates for 1 minute, that's 1 minute of meditation practice that wasn't there before in their life. And that's 1 minute of settling. And so if you're beginning to meditate and you're a person who has a hard time sitting still, there's no reason why you have to sit for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. Or suppose you're a person who meditates and you're quite comfortable sitting still, but you've got a life that doesn't allow that. You're raising young children, you're caring for elderly parents, you've got a couple of jobs, whatever it might be. Then working with the reality of your constitution, working with the reality of your circumstance, you find a way to allow the practice to work for you. You bring the practice together with the realities of your life. And I actually have worked with a number of people who meditate for a minute or two every day. That's their practice, a minute or two every day. And initially, I was like, well, does that work? I would ask them, and they said, yeah, it makes a huge difference in my life. I feel like I settle, I feel like I connect with something, and then I feel like I can go on from that place. And, tomorrow I'll do the same thing yet again. So we can really adapt the practice, again, to the realities of our inspiration and the realities of our constitution and the reality of our life situation. So long periods of time aren't a make or break deal with meditation practice as far as I'm concerned. If you can meditate for a minute and you weren't meditating before, I will throw up my arms and celebrate with you.
wow, so even 1 minute of meditation can help get settled down. So when they're settling, like for that 1 minute, do they need to focus on certain object or their breath, or they just sit silently? How does that go?
I think we could just sit silently. In theory, we could just sit silently and settle that way. The truth of the matter is, though, we all have these minds that wander. And that's no problem. It's just the truth of the situation. Our minds wander. So when we sit quietly, what happens is our mind goes to whatever. What am I going to have for lunch? Do I need to go and get some milk for my tea? Is the grocery store even open today? Our mind just goes wherever it goes. And so for that reason, and you use the word object, for that reason, we do need to have an object of meditation. It's very helpful to have a clear sense of where we're going to place our attention when we meditate so that we can settle. And a simple one, you mentioned it, is the breath. Just allow our attention to turn toward the breath and just settle there. And if you're anything like me, your mind will then quickly wander somewhere else. And so you very gently but firmly bring it back. So yes, it's helpful to have what is the technical term is an object of meditation, a clear sense of where you're going to be placing your attention when you meditate. And a very good one, a very common one, is the breath.
Yeah, I think that solves the problem for many people who are always asking, do I need to meditate? They are having anxiety or anything, they are asking me, how do I do breath work? And I'm like, first you have to calm your anxious mind.
Yeah. So yeah, and how do we do that? We turn our attention toward that breath over and over again. And yes, sometimes our mind's going to be anxious. And so what we're going to find is that we have to do a lot of turning. It's like attention on the breath, wander, attention on the breath, wander. That's frustrating, but that's okay. That's our meditation practice. Other times, it'll be a little bit easier. We turn our attention to the breath, and maybe our attention stays there for 5 seconds before it wanders. And then we do the same thing. We do the same thing.
Great. Neil, tell us, have you always been meditating, or when did it start it? Did you started this practice?
I've almost always been meditating. When I was a teenager, I was a competitive swimmer. And I was a competitive swimmer at a time in the swimming world anyway, where sports psychology was beginning to open up. And so we were doing things like visualization and progressive relaxation. And into that mix, one of the swim coaches introduced meditation. And so I was probably 15 years old, maybe. And a swim coach at a swim meet in Vancouver one weekend kept us up way too late and taught us how to meditate. And I've been more or less regular with the practice since then, which is, some decades now, which ages me a little bit, but it's been some decades now.
Great. So you are a pro at meditation already. Like before
Well,
you became a teacher.
I think one of the things that I've learned, and I'm sure anyone who's meditated for any length of time would agree, that meditation resists mastery. That it's a very humbling activity because my mind still wanders all over the place. I still have a lot of difficulty bringing my attention to that object of meditation, whatever it might be. And so when I sit down with beginners, one of the things I say is, what's going on for me or what's going on for you is exactly what's going on for me in general terms. Unruly, wild mind of its own mind that I'm beginning to develop a relationship with and a little capacity to try and be present with. So a pro at meditation, no, I'd say a decided amateur like everyone else.
I think that's quite humble of you, Neil, for saying that. Neil, you mentioned about your encounter with a dysfunctional mentor, spiritual
Yeah.
mentor. How does that go? What was the story? Can you share with the audience if you're comfortable?
Yeah. Well, we talked about my beginnings with meditation, beginning as a teenager and a competitive swimmer. And after that evening of instruction, I was interested. There was something compelling about the practice. And so I decided to stay with it, or I ended up staying with it. And for a long time, I just sort of wandered around. I would read books. I would sit down and close my eyes and think I was meditating. I don't know in retrospect whether I was or not, but I thought I was. And about 30 years ago, I started to give some form to my engagement with meditation. I started to study and practice in 2 successive communities, both of which are rooted in Tibetan Buddhism. So I was engaging formal curriculum, and I was doing long retreats. And then in 2005 or so, I started teaching. And beginning at about 2016, my relationship with the second of these communities started to fray. I started to feel a little bit uncomfortable with how the leader was treating his close students, especially. Something was not sitting right for me. And in 2018, I had an opportunity to become part of an inner circle of really the senior most students in that community. And my discomfort really intensified based on what I was seeing and experiencing. I've often said it was like I was in The Wizard of Oz and I'd come to the end of the yellow brick road and I had gone into the wizard's castle and I had pulled back the curtain. And what I saw, I didn't really like. It became evident to me that in spite of what I believed, in spite of what I felt I'd been told, in spite of what I told other people as a senior member of this community, the thing driving the community at the end of the day wasn't the teachings or the practices. It wasn't the well-being of the students or the development of the students, but the whims and impulses of the leader and the extent to which he was willing to go to assert these whims and impulses was really quite appalling to me. The environment was characterized by a lot of manipulation. It was characterized by a lot of disempowerment, and it was characterized by a level of disrespect that sometimes seemed like contempt for the people that he'd worked with for the longest period of time, the people who'd been most devoted to what he was offering. And so through 2019, I really struggled. There was this dissonance between what I thought I had been involved in and what I was beginning to see and feel and sense and know. And I went through pretty much a year of really painful dissonance around this. And then at a certain point, my mental and physical situation just couldn't take it anymore. I'd love to say that it was, there were ethical principle reasons for why I left, but physically and mentally, I was breaking down. I couldn't be part of that anymore. So in early 2020, I left. I said that I was done.
So you met that mentor in Tibet?
No, at a meditation retreat in Colorado.
In Colorado.
Yeah.
And when you said, I'm just curious, when you said behind the curtains, there was different things, like when you pulled off the curtains.
Yeah.
How did that look like?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that became apparent was the degree, I use the word manipulation, the degree of manipulation that was going on. And there were a number of ways that the manipulation showed up. I think the most prevalent would be what I call in my own mind, the kind of bait and switch, excuse me, which would be, something would be dangled in front of us. We're going to do this. And once people was on board, once I was on board, once other people were on board, either we'd change it and do something different, or it would just be dropped. It would just be forgotten about. And that doesn't sound like much, but it happened over and over and over again. We're going to do this. Okay. We're going to do this. Oh, okay. We're going to do this. Okay. And each time the thisness kept being taken away, which over the period of, a long period of time, this had the effect of really undermining my sense of trust in my own experience, trust in what was going on in the community, trust in the leader. It was a very, very undermining experience. And the expectation was we'd just go along with it. And oftentimes to not go along with it was to carried certain risks. You could be removed from positions that you were holding. You could be denigrated publicly or privately. I mean, there were risks that went with actually saying, wait a second, something weird's going on here. And so that was kind of the real big manifestation for me of what I was seeing behind the curtain, was that constant bait and switch, that constant manipulation.
Yeah, so instead of empowering you to take your own decisions, you were somewhere forced to do what was directed to you.
Over and over and over again. And, that was the disempowering piece. And I remember being part of a meeting where, someone offered a little bit of dissent, not much, but a little bit of dissent to the latest bait and switch. And, at the end of the day, the response of the leader was, this is just who I am and what I'm going to do. And so completely disempowering, that is the appropriate word, is rather, going back to the beginning of what we were talking about here, rather than developing a relationship with our own inborn intelligence and beginning and deepening our capacity to trust and let that guide us in the world, we were expected to override that, undermine that, ignore that, cut that, and follow the bait and switch of the leader, which is, fundamentally spiritually disempowering, which I think is part of the reason why it was and has been such a difficult process for me.
Yeah, and it sounds like he became a corporate leader. It reminded me of a lot of corporate leaders who sometimes try to manipulate so that the work is done. But this is not corporate, this is a retreat. So, yeah, I think you have been through a lot and you are
Yeah.
courageous. Would really like to appreciate you on that you are sharing the story with us here.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, because it's part of my getting out from under that manipulative, disempowered, disrespectful situation, is to be able to say with you what I wasn't able to say for years within that community.
So Neil, if you go to your younger you, the younger Neil, like 15 years back, what would be one advice you would give him, which you didn't knew at that time?
It's interesting. We keep coming back to this inner wisdom piece. I said that beginning around 2016, my relationship with the second, this community began to fray, that I started to feel uncomfortable with what the leader was doing with particularly his senior teachers. And there was a moment where we were all expected to get on board with something. And there was this little twitch. I can feel it sitting with you right now. There was this little twitch that said, something about this ain't right. Just that little twitch. And for a variety of reasons, I swept it aside. That can't be true. It'll be okay. Oh, don't worry about that. Just however I swept it aside, I swept it aside. And so if I could go back in time, I would say, trust those little twitches. Not just that one, but, of course, I think we're all familiar with that dynamic, that thing showing up, that knowing showing up in our lives is just this little sense of like, hold on a second. And so I would go back and say, those little twitches are trustworthy. Pay attention. When they happen, sit down, settle, and just listen and see where they lead you.
Yeah, I think we call it inner voice or intuition, commonly, like little twitches.
Yeah.
And so many times we ignore it because we think, oh, how can I give up so easily? It should, maybe I am wrong. I'm just thinking over it.
That's a very big one for me. Mary, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not seeing things the way they actually are. I'll just wait.
And then we wait too long.
Yeah. And then we wait too long. And in my case, I waited long enough that the little twitch disappeared and I was further down the road that I was going, that, I needed to extricate myself from.
So how does one ensure that they listen to their inner voice, yet they don't give up on things every single time? Because sometimes it can mislead also. I don't know. Means, what do you think about it?
Well, I mean, maybe I can share with you a little bit about what happened after I left, because I think it answers that question. And it's not a definitive answer to your question, but it's the answer that's happened for me, that's come forward in my life. And, when I left into early 2020, there was a tremendous amount of relief. My whole system just sighed, just like, oh my goodness. At the same time, the sense of loss was overwhelming. I lost a community, I lost a path, I lost peers, I lost a livelihood because I was teaching in that community. I lost trust, confidence, direction. And I had no idea what to do with this. And I had no idea what to do with the grief and the anxiety and the depression that came in the wake of this. And so I walked a lot. I sat on the couch and stared out the window a lot. And I meditated, which is interesting, because I don't really know why I meditated. A lot of my former peers, other people who stepped away from that community have also, at least for a while, stepped away from the practice of meditation. And that's not what happened for me. For whatever reason, and I cannot give you a reason, I stepped toward the practice a little bit. And it was a much simpler practice than I'd been doing in the previous years, much less expectant practice than I'd engaged before. But more or less every day, I would sit down and I would turn my attention and I would settle in and I would receive what was showing itself. And now those familiar with Buddhist meditation at this point might say, well, that's not surprising, because I've just offered a very traditional description of meditation consisting of these two phases of turning our attention towards and settling into, and a phase where we receive, where we witness what the practice, what our bodies, what our lives want to show us, which we were talking about at the outset. What surprised me about this, though, was threefold, three things. What I found I was turning my attention toward over and over again was not the breath, which we've talked about, not the breath as I intended, but that overwhelming sense of lostness. I actually found myself settling into, not getting rid of, not changing, but settling into lostness. I was so lost. I still am to a certain extent. Second thing that shocked me was that what I found, what was being revealed when I settled into my lostness, what I received and witnessed, often spoke directly to what was going on in my life in that moment. Which, the third thing that shocked me was this suggested that meditation may have three phases to it. There's one in which we settle, one in which we receive whatever our life wants to show us, and then a third where we let the revelation that comes out of our settling guide us into the world. And that's what I started to do, because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have anything else to do. And so if what arose in meditation practice suggested that I rest, I rested. If it suggested that I reach out to someone, I reached out. If it suggested that I get trauma therapy because I was stuck, and I did a lot of trauma therapy, I got trauma therapy. And I found myself actually moving through my loss and my grief, not getting over really, because I still have some really tough days, but beginning to move through, and in the process, finding a sense of direction and purpose and clarity that I hadn't had before. And so, back to your question, I think there's many ways that we can develop our fidelity to those little twitches, that intuition, that inner voice. And what I've found through my own experience in the last couple of years is that meditation actually can offer that to us as well. Meditation can be part of the answer to that question. And it is proving to be an answer for me.
Yeah, Neil, thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing this personal story. As you're saying, you're still recovering. So I would really appreciate you on that. And it reminded me of my own story also. When I left my corporate job, I was always having that little voice in my head for more than 5.5 years. This is not the work I want to do. And I stayed too long. And then when I left, I had nowhere to go. So when you were saying the sense of loss, not knowing what I'm going to do next. It just reminded me of everything. And then you mentioned about letting go and let the universe take over and guide you. I think that is one of the most like the most prominent thing that helped me with breakthroughs. So thank you so much for sharing that, because the moment I let go, the universe starts playing its role, I think.
Thanks for offering that. I mean, you told this little bit of your story, and I've actually got tears in my eyes having heard that. It's really affecting to hear that as well,
Thank
because it's a
you.
little bit lonely, this path.
Yeah, this is a
Yeah.
lonely, this is a lonely journey. Like you are like earlier, when I was in the corporate, the boss would tell me what to do and like I have to complete the task. And now I am my boss, so I have to tell everyone, see, I have a meeting, I cannot go with you. So right now also my family is out in the market and I am here being my own boss.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way of putting it.
But
Yeah.
I am
It's
enjoying. I think this is something which is worth it. Maybe it's tough, but it's worth it for me.
Yeah, I've often said I wouldn't wish what I went through on anybody, and yet, more and more, I see the value in it. I see the worth itness of it. It's worth it. It's worth it.
Yeah. So let's come back to how to meditate, because a lot of
Mhm.
people have that issues. So
Yeah.
what would be your three simplest tips for a beginner so that they can start meditating?
So let's try and give 3 tips so that a listener could finish this podcast episode and just sit down and meditate. So the first thing would be, um, place your attention somewhere clear and definitive. Let's say the breath. Simply place your attention on the breath. Whatever this means to you, wherever you find it, place your attention on the breath. That's 1. And then 2, always be willing to come back to the breath when your attention wanders. And then 3, be kind to yourself. Don't expect that your meditation practice look a particular way. It doesn't need to be a certain length. It doesn't need to lead to an empty mind. It doesn't need to be easy. It doesn't need to be hard. Be kind to yourself. And so people will often ask me, well, what should I experience when I'm meditating? And I give 2 answers. One is, well, you don't really need to experience anything in particular. And the second answer is, if there's any answer to that question of you should be experiencing whatever you experience when you meditate. That's the answer. So if you find yourself relaxed, if you find yourself anxious, if you find yourself sleepy, if you find yourself awake, if you find yourself frustrated, if you find yourself happy, be kind to yourself and let your meditation be what it is. So 1, place your attention on the breath. 2, be willing to come back to the breath over and over again. And 3, kindness. So 3A, kindness, 3B, kindness, and 3C, kindness. Be kind to yourself.
That's like you have put all the things in the summary also. So I hope they got the tips exactly. Um, so how do they be kind to themselves? Because I think many people are the biggest criticizers. We would never say, oh, I did something, because that seems to be like you are proud of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So how to be kind to ourselves?
I think the biggest thing is to let our experience be what our experience is. I think we all know that dynamic of, so suppose you sit down and you follow the first 2, you put your attention on the breath, and you're willing to, as the best of your capacity, to come back to the breath. And then maybe there's a thought that comes up and says, maybe I'm not doing this right. Well, don't judge that thought. Just let that thought be there. And if you think maybe I'm not doing this right, yeah, I always do things wrong, and now I'm doing meditation wrong. Well, don't judge that thought, or don't judge the thought that comes next, or don't judge the thought. Just try not to judge whatever your experience is. Just let it be. When you sit down to meditate, just let your experience be whatever your experience is. That's, I think, what I'm trying to point to with kindness. I think a word that comes up a lot in beginner meditation classes that I lead is acceptance. People will say, so you're talking about acceptance? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. I think accept what's happening to you during your meditation practice.
Yeah, I think, and if you are not able to do yourself, then please connect with Neil, because sometimes we can't stop judging ourselves, and that is when the mentors come in and they help us redirect our focus.
Yeah, I think if there was a fourth one, that would definitely be it, is seek out sources of support, seek out resources. For whatever reason, meditation is hard to do by ourselves. And there are, a range of resources and support out there in the world. And so find a source of support that resonates for you and take advantage of that. Would be 4.
Great. Thank you so much, Neil, for this amazing episode and sharing with us your story and being so vulnerable. Anything you would like to share before we close the session?
I think so. I think one of the things that, excuse me, one of the things that has happened through my own experience is that, we've been recounting over the last few years, is a sense of affirming my belief that meditation is really about the stuff of our lives. It's about resting in the stuff of our lives. It's about receiving insight into the stuff of our lives. And it's about letting this insight, guide us out into the world, which is really, now what I try to do in my work. I try to educate about the teachings and practices of meditation, and then encourage and empower so that people can find what these teachings and practices want and need to be, what they want and need to reveal in our own unique lives. Bringing to meditation to life is the phrase I often use. I educate, encourage, and empower so that people can bring meditation to life. And I offer a wide range of resources to do that. Bringing meditation to life is a very broad task, so I have a broad range of offerings. Excuse me. And the best way to really get a summary of that is to check out my website, which is neilmckinlay.com. I'm an L-A-Y McKinlay, not an L-E-Y McKinlay, which is rare, but I am neilmckinlay.com. And the website will give you a good overview of everything that I'm offering. And if you're so inspired, you can sign up to my newsletter, and that'll give you a gradual introduction to what I'm doing. It'll keep you abreast of upcoming events. And when that email arrives every month, it'll remind you that meditation might actually have a role to play in your life. It's really interesting how many people I hear from, and they say, oh, I got your newsletter. And I'm like, yes, I'm so glad. I worked so hard and so many hours. Did you like the newsletter? And they say, oh, well, I never open the email or look at it. I just get your email. And then I remember, oh, yeah, I want to meditate a little bit more. And I used to be really frustrated in that. And now I just consider it a win, because for that moment, people remember that meditation may have something to offer their life, and that maybe it's something that they'll look into, and maybe something that they'll follow through. So neilmckinlay.com. And if there's an action item, it would be to sign up for the newsletter and learn a little bit more through that venue.
Sure, Neil. I'll surely put on your website below this podcast. There is a description box as well as comment box. I'll be sharing it with the everyone who is watching this podcast, listening to this podcast. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing all these knowledgeable things and some quick tips that people can actually apply in their life and start meditating. I hope someone gets inspired. If you are someone who is inspired, please write in the comment box so that both me and Neil know that now you are inspired to meditate, and you can visit his website and get guided through it. And this is not a paid ad. So this is something I'm just doing as this is my purpose of life. So just to help you out. So, friends, thank you so much for staying with us till the end and watching this episode. I hope you like it. Please follow this channel, subscribe to the channel, and let me know your thoughts. What is some topic you would like to learn more? Because every week we call on experts who share their knowledge so that they inspire you to take action. So if you are inspired, let me know. I'll meet you next week with another amazing expert. Till then, keep smiling and keep shining. It's me, Pratishtha Bhalla.